So, all right, so I'm Michael DiGiovine for all the sociology students who might not have had me. I'm a professor of anthropology here at Westchester. I'm also the director of the Museum of Anthropology and Archaeology, which is in Old Library. And this is being held in conjunction with the Anthropology Club, and we're going to have an introduction by the president of the Anthro Club. But it's also being co-sponsored by the museum, because if you haven't seen, we have a great exhibition that Dr. Baba had helped to contribute to, and some of our curators are here, on West African healing and health. So if you haven't gone to a library, it's right in the atrium gallery in the museum. So when you come in that front door, it's right there. You can see different kinds of healing practices practiced in Ghana, in Niger, in Nigeria, in Mali, from spirit possession to herbal medicines to Islamic healing and so on. So I want to urge you to take a look at that really fascinating exhibition, or you can see it online. The exhibition is called Surrounded by the Spirits, and if you go to wcupa.edu/Surrounded by the Spirits, you can see the 3D exhibition. You can walk through it and take a look at everything. This lecture, in addition to a bunch of other lectures that we've had already, will be up on that website as well. So tell everyone about it. It'd be great to spread the word. So I'm going to pass over to Paige Irvine, who's the president of the Anthropology Club. And there's snacks, and I'm going to pass this around as well, the sign-in sheet, in case you didn't get a chance to sign it. Please do. It's good for our members.
All right, I just have a bit of a blurb, an introduction for Dr. Baba. Her resume is quite impressive, so excuse me for reading off of this directly from time to time. But Dr. Baba is an associate professor in the Department of Public Health, the Department of Public Health Sciences at Westchester. She currently teaches both undergraduate and graduate courses in the department for both the undergrad and graduate programs. Dr. Baba has experience working in hospital environments, with the state government, and in academia. She has extensive experience in all aspects of the research process, designing and deploying instruments for primary data collection, and in various settings, and analyzing secondary administrative data sets. Dr. Baba's areas of expertise include quantitative research methods, health disparities, minority health, immigrant health, program evaluation, and chronic disease prevention and control. Dr. Baba has a Master's of Science in Epidemiology from the University of Iowa, and a Doctorate of Public Health and Community Health and Prevention from Drexel University. So she has a lot of experience. I'm very excited to hear this talk. Again, this is co-sponsored by the Anthropology Club, of which I am president, and the university's Museum of Anthropology and Archaeology. I highly recommend you guys check out the exhibit that is still up. It'll be up until September, and Dr. Baba helped work on it, and we appreciate her help so much.
Do you have anything coming up?
Not particularly, but we are doing like a little final meeting. It's just a de-stress coloring night. So if you guys are freaking out next week over finals, come hang out with us Wednesday night at 6. We're gonna have like coloring and music, and it's gonna be chill times. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you everybody for having me here. Like Paige said, I'm in the Department of Public Health Sciences. And so what I'm going to talk about today comes a lot from my own experience and my own kind of like exposure. So to give you a little bit of background, I'm a first-generation American. My parents are originally from Ghana, and as a kid, I would go back every summer, spend about like 2 months every summer, and even now as an adult, I take my kids. And so kind of talking about this is something that is fun for me because it kind of melds my interest in both like health and healing, but also like the cultural aspects of it as well, which is a lot of the research that I've done previously. And so this is the title, What is Health? Dissecting West African Healing Practices. Just to give you an idea of what's here on the screen, over here, these are different kinds of traditional or herbal medicines that are used. A lot of them are like dried roots or dried plants that are used, or different like juices and stuff and tonics and stuff that are made from those. There's a lot of religious aspects to healing practices well. And then over here is just a picture of one of the many modern health facilities that we have. And so that's when I talk about health and healing, there's kind of these buckets that I put them in. And so what I want to do is give you like an idea of what each of these mean, and then kind of put it all together so that you understand how complex an idea it is. So first things first, this is a pre-colonial map of West Africa. And I put this up here for several reasons. Number one, I can talk specifically about what is going on in Ghana, but understanding that pre-colonialism, our, shall I say, kingdoms, were not really geographically defined. And so there's a lot of similarities across West Africa when it comes to what it is that people do, how they practice, how they think. But we're also not a monolith, so there are differences, right? So this is pre-colonialism and how it looks. You can see the modern countries over there. And so right over here, this is Ghana. This is where I'm from. And actually where my parents are from is like right up here where you get Togo, Burkina Faso, and everything kind of like smushed into one. And so just a little bit talking about what happened when we were colonized by the Europeans. So this is a current map showing the current borders within West Africa. So there was what we call the Scramble for Africa, which was a series of invasions, colonizations, and partitions of most of West Africa. The only country in West Africa that was not colonized was Liberia. Liberia was founded by freed enslaved folks that went over there from the United States and Canada. The green depicts countries that were colonized by the French. The yellow are independent states, and then we have the reddish, which are British. And so this over here, this is Ghana, that's where I'm from. We're surrounded by our wonderful French-speaking people, just to give you an idea of what that looks like today. The reason why the Scramble for Africa happened was acquisition and power is what they were looking for. So there's a lot of natural resources that kind of are in these areas, so gold, tin, cocoa, and stuff like that. But also it was strategic because a lot of European countries were using these as ports for kind of refueling and things like that for the folks who were going out and conquering other nations. And so this is important. You'll find out why a little bit later, but just kind of want to put that in there. And so the first part is kind of thinking about traditional healing practices and what it is that we kind of do with those. Because as I showed in the first slide, we had our own kingdoms before. And so there are customs that we had before, there are traditions that we had before. And these are the things that kind of like have been passed down generation to generation. Just to give you a little bit of context when it comes to traditional healing practices. A lot of traditional healing practices are passed down from family to family. And so there are specific families that are known for specific aspects of healing. And so in my family, for example, I have an uncle who is an herbalist. And so anytime somebody gets sick with something, they go to him and he can find whatever herb or whatever it is that is useful for healing. And that is information that he passes down to his kids and that they pass out to their kids. And so they know literally the house that you go to if you need something like that. I have another uncle who is known as, and this is just a direct translation, as a bone setter. So if anybody in the community breaks a bone, they go to him and he sets it, and then he helps them fix it. The reason why these practices still exist today is because they work. And so I myself have been a recipient of some of these healing practices. And so when I was about 10 or 11 years old, I had a skin disease called yaws. Yaws is a skin disease that's caused by bacteria. And what it does is it causes blisters on your skin and they can become inflamed. If they're not treated, then it can actually cause bone problems and things And so it happened on my left leg, between my knee and my ankle was completely swollen. I could not walk. I'm 10 years old, I have no idea what this thing is. And so my dad calls my uncle over and says, listen, she's got this thing, she can't move, like, what do we do? So he went and got whatever plants it is that he had. All I remember is that they were green. He crushed them up into a paste and put them on my leg, and within like a couple of hours, I was completely fine. My mom, who is a skeptic in my family, was like, we should probably just take her to the hospital just to make sure she's okay. And so it was when they went to the hospital that they found out what the disease was actually called. And apparently all you needed is penicillin, and that's all that cures it. I didn't need it at that point in time because the doctors determined that, everything was fine. But that's just kind of an example of that. When it comes to traditional healing practices, the reason why they are so prevalent is because access is so important. These are people who live in the community, who know the community, and so there's an element of trust that goes along with it. So they're often the first line of healing that happens in communities. The other thing is cost. Generally, with a traditional healer, you barter. So if you don't have money, I'll give you like a sack of corn, or I'll give you a sheep or a goat or a chicken, or I'll have my kid come and farm for you for a couple of days, or something like that. In the case of family, like in my case, are like, whatever, like that's my kid, And so those are like some of the reasons why these things still kind of hang around. But there's a lot of different ways in which that shows up. You tend to see traditional healing practices more in rural areas than urban areas. But I will say that there are many, many instances of people who do live in urban areas who have access to like the greatest medical facilities, who will still send back to their villages for some of these traditional medicines and things like that. All right. So next are religious healing practices. And so let me give you a little bit of an outlay of, kind of like the religions that exist within West Africa. So first is Islam. So Islam came about in like 7th century as a result of the Arabs kind of moving over and trade as well. And so there's a lot of trade, information, and stuff like that that kind of happened within West Africa. For a lot of West African countries, there's a very clear demarcation between where it's majority Christian and where it's majority Muslim. And so the Sahel region, right, is where you see majority Muslim. And so in a lot of West African countries, like right here, the northern part of the country tends to be majority Muslim, whilst the southern part of the country tends to be majority Christian. And so if we look at it on the map, this is what we see. So the green is Islam, the red is Christianity, and then the yellow is indigenous. I argue with indigenous because really we've maintained a lot of our indigenous practices, so it's more like a blending of both of those. But along the coastlines is where you're going to see Christianity, and that is a direct result of the history of enslaved folks in Africa. And so that's where the differences happen. In my family, I would say like we're 50-50. Like I have Christian family members and Muslim family members. Like it's just kind of like, it's not unusual. And so for a lot of these countries as well, we celebrate Christmas and Easter and everything, but then we'll celebrate Ramadan and Eid and all of that. Like everybody knows everything about everything. And so that's kind of like what we see. And so when it comes to the healing practices as it relates to religion, there's a lot of overlap. I don't know if any of y'all are familiar with people from West Africa, but we take our religion very seriously, very, very seriously at times. And so just a little bit, just showing, things that we use in terms of religious healing practices. These are leather pouches that are used, and so what people do is they write verses, either from the Quran or from the Bible. They put it in there as a way of protecting people, oftentimes you'll see like the smaller ones on like babies' wrists or as like a necklace on them. This over here shows a child with threads around their chest. Oftentimes either like a priest or an imam will read whatever verses or whatever over the threads and you put them on the child. And they actually use that for kids who suffer from like respiratory illnesses, chest pains and things like that. It's just an example of that. If you ever go to West Africa, and especially in our urban centers, it is not unusual to see huge poster boards advertising the healing powers of somebody who claims to be a learned individual. So this is a Muslim cleric. Malam up here just means somebody who is supposedly learned in the Quran. I say supposedly with a very, very sarcastic tone to it. And these are all the things that this one individual can actually cure with it. This is an actual billboard. This is actually from a Facebook page of an individual. And so like how they do this, I don't know. I have a cousin who does this work. Again, very skeptical about it. This is a billboard that in Accra, so this is the capital city of Ghana. So this is major metropolitan area that has like Marriott hotels and all that other stuff, and then you have this. So this phrase, "Kun fayakun," comes from the Quran, which basically means "what will be." And so sometimes there's the use of phrases and things like that to actually get people to come and partake in whatever it is. And as you can see, there's like 1,001 different things that this person can supposedly cure for you. All right, modern healing. So we have traditional, we have religious, but modern is kind of like what we all kind of know here in terms of like hospitals and things like that. This is a picture of Ridge Hospital in Accra, Ghana. It is probably one of the nicest hospitals there. It has like maternity ward, cardiology, stuff like that, state of the art kind of stuff. There's also a joint, I think they're Danish and British hospital there as well. If you walk into them, they rival any American hospital. And so we do have a lot of those. But a little bit about where you can actually find these. So this is a map showing, everything's linked back to slavery, showing slavery routes from West Africa, because we know that most enslaved people were shipped out from West Africa. They were captured in different places, but the stations where they were at was West Africa. So shipped out from West Africa over to the Americas. The reason why I show this is because when the colonizers came, part of what they did was they established posts in specific countries. Part of establishing those posts meant modernizing certain areas. And so they only went so deep in terms of the countries that they were in. There's a lot of tropical diseases, there's a lot of nasty insects and animals and all that other stuff. So they didn't go too far in. And so when it comes to the actual development of the countries that we're looking at, along the coasts is where you see most modernization. When you get into the interior, that's where it's really, really rural. And the reason that I say this is because, and so this is a current map, if you look at all of the capital cities of the countries, especially for those that border the Atlantic, they're all on the coast. All the capital cities is where you're gonna find the modern medical facilities. And so when we think about access and think about who can get where, in a lot of countries, there's only probably 1 or 2 cities that you can actually go to get advanced care. So for example, this is Ghana over here. This is Accra, which is the capital city. This is where we have the biggest hospitals, the nicest hospitals. If anybody in the country needs any kind of, let's say, surgery, for example, for like cancer, they gotta travel there, number 1. Number 2, they've got to be able to feed themselves, find accommodation. So imagine if you needed care and the only place you could go was Washington, D.C., and you had to be there for 3 months. Just imagine. And so that's kind of, we talk a lot about, oh, people don't really go to hospitals and blah, blah, yada, yada. But when you think about the financial burden that comes with it, it's something to kind of think about. And so, this is kind of what we're kind of faced with. So this is a picture of Korle-Bu Hospital, which is the largest hospital in Ghana. It is a teaching hospital, and they have pretty much every specialty in there. Let me get my notes out. It was built in 1923. So this is about 30 years before Ghana got their independence. It is currently the 3rd largest hospital in all of Africa. And it's a national referral center. So every single person in Ghana who needs some kind of treatment has got to go there. Let me give you, again, an example from my life. So my uncle, the one who's an herbalist, right? You go to him for, if you have like a cough or something, he's gonna prescribe you something. He had throat cancer a few years ago. And so, of course, tried all the local stuff, it's not working. So he had to travel to Accra. So let me give you what he had to do. He had to get up from our village, which is in the northern part of Ghana, travel 5 hours by car on a bumpy gravel road, take another bus, another 3 hours now on a paved road, and then take a flight, a 1-hour flight to the capital city of Accra. Now, thinking back to, we have all these kingdoms and there's all these kinds of languages. In Accra, he doesn't know anybody. They don't speak the same language, right? So that's a problem. And imagine being plopped into a place where at the hospital they speak English, my uncle doesn't speak any English, right? And so, problematic. And so, luckily, my dad kind of helped him navigate all of these things, but he goes one time and then thinking about cancer, you got follow-ups, you got surgery, and all that other stuff. And so a lot of people, they'll go the first time, but when they feel kind of like the burden of going, they're not gonna go a second, third, fourth, fifth time, right? And so that's one of the things that kind of hinders in terms of like advanced medical care. They're trying, I should say, but there's a lot of other things that kind of go into it. And so in order to kind of think about how do we shift our modern medical facilities to these rural areas that really do need them, because people are willing to use them if they have access, right? They're just not accessing them because they're not available. There's a lot of partnerships that happen with a lot of different aid agencies to actually help folks access clinics and things like that. So this is a clinic that was built. This was in conjunction with a German aid company. And so what they do is they go to different rural areas and provide like just a building with maybe 3 or 4 rooms in it to allow for people to go there for like clinical stuff that they need. It's really basic medical care. This is not a place where surgery can happen or anything like that, but it is kind of like a step in the right direction for things like that. The other thing is that a lot of our medical centers are also affiliated with religious organizations as well. So this is an Ahmadiyya clinic that was opened in Kumasi, which is like in the middle of the country. In the town that I grew up in when we were going to Ghana, there's a Baptist medical center there, which is really nice because as a kid, the Baptist Medical Center actually gets doctors from here in the United States. So it was always nice because whenever we went over there, we could actually like interact with Americans in the middle of nowhere, which was kind of cool to my sisters and I. And so there are facilities like this that are available across the country as well. And so you kind of see that mixing of like the religious aspect with the medical aspect of things as well. And so now knowing all of this, let me give you a teeny tiny overview of what is currently going on with the status of health in West Africa and really across the continent. And so globally, we have seen a large decrease in the number of infectious diseases, right? We've had vaccinations, we know about hand washing and all those other things. So we have a decrease in infectious diseases. But we also know that we are seeing sharp increases in chronic diseases, right? And so the chronic diseases are related to a lot of different things: lifestyle, life expectancy, dietary patterns, and all of these other things. And Africa is no different. And so let me show you just a series of maps so you can see how that's changed over the course of time. So this is 1990, looking at the leading causes of death across the African continent. What we see over here, this yellowish, is diarrheal diseases. So these are going to be due to poor water, poor food, things like that. The pinkish are malaria, which is a disease that is spread by mosquitoes. And then we have respiratory illnesses as well. So this is 1990. We move to 2000. We have a little bit of a change. We still see the diarrheal diseases up here. We're seeing more lower respiratory infections. Malaria comes up as well. And then the blue is HIV/AIDS, right? HIV/AIDS, really, in the United States, we think about the 80s and 90s. But it always takes a little bit of a while for diseases to spread, right? And so we're starting to see that. And obviously, Southern Africa had huge impact in terms of HIV/AIDS. This is 2000. Then we have 2010. So in 2010, we have malaria. We have no data for some of these folks in there. So malaria, like I said, mosquitoes. Some of the impacts are related to climate change because of weather patterns and things like that. And then finally, we have 2019. So in 2019, we see a shift from infectious diseases, and now we're seeing cardiovascular disease kind of popping up in different areas as well. Some of the reasons why these are popping up, there's a lot of different reasons why these are happening, but number one is probably we know how to treat and prevent some of these infectious diseases. There's been a lot that has been done, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, to kind of prevent some of these. There's a malaria vaccine right now, hooray, that they're kind of in final phases of testing and things like that. But we also see increasing GDP as well. With increasing GDP, you have more people moving into the middle class, and so that means that other things are going to kind of pop up. Let me just give you a few statistics as it relates to this. Within sub-Saharan Africa itself, we know that the risk factors that are contributing to what we're seeing in terms of cardiovascular diseases and cancer are related to tobacco use, high blood pressure, and dietary factors. There's suggestion that we may be able to come up with policies to actually prevent some of this from happening, but we're not sure. These non-communicable diseases account for about 37% of deaths in 2019, which was up from 24% in 2000. So that's a difference of what, 13% over the course of 20 years. One of the ways in which we can actually control some of this is to think about tobacco consumption. In a lot of these countries, there is no regulation when it comes to tobacco. You can send a kid out on the street to go and buy you a pack of cigarettes and bring it home. Nobody's gonna ask for ID. And really, not a lot of people have to carry ID for that anyway, so it's kind of futile. We have harmful uses of alcohol. I don't know if anybody in here has heard of tramadol. Anybody heard of tramadol? No. So tramadol, I don't know what kind of drug drug it is, but it's kind of like, I don't know if it's a opioid or not, but it's like similar to that. Like it's really, it's very addictive. It's a painkiller, and it's something that is being looked at in terms of like regulation of it. So that's one of the things that they're looking at. Because of the increasing GDP in a lot of these countries, the United States and other European countries have been able to import their best in terms of food services to some of these places. And so KFC, Burger King, Pizza Hut, Domino's exists in a lot of these places. And it really is kind of like a show of wealth to take your kids to Burger King, right? So it's like kind of like the opposite from like here. And so, I mean, like I've never seen a birthday party at KFC, but in Ghana they do birthday parties at KFC. Like that's the place, that's the place to be. And so it's contributed a lot to some of these health outcomes that we're kind of seeing as well. And so when it comes to really thinking about what do we do, there's obviously policy. There's policy that can actually be enacted to kind of think about some of these things. But I would actually argue that it would be using all of these three things together. Let me give you an example. COVID-19, March 2020. And so we had COVID-19, we had the pandemic, we had the lockdown, right? Everybody's masking, distancing, all that good stuff. And unfortunately, couldn't travel during that time. And so when they finally semi-opened the borders, there were restrictions in terms of you needed to have COVID vaccine, if you were traveling, and I don't know if anybody traveled during that time, you had to take a COVID test at least, at the most 72 hours before your flight. It had to be negative, yada yada, and all that good stuff. Let me tell you about what happened in Ghana. So in Ghana, before you even got to the airport, you had to fill out a form and give kind of your history of COVID, if you had a COVID test, if you had the vaccine, all that good stuff. In some cases, I think you even had to upload your COVID vaccine card, right? This is before you even get on the plane. When you get to the airport, at the gate, they're looking for your yellow fever vaccine, because that's required, and your COVID card. You can't use, something that you take a picture of. It has to be the actual physical card. At the airport, they also make you fill out a form attesting that you don't have fever, all, those symptoms of COVID. Get on the plane, everybody's masked and all that good stuff. When you land in Accra, you need to take a COVID test where they swab your nose or your throat. And you had to wait, it had to be negative before you could leave. This test cost $150 per person. Okay, so traveling as a family for $600 out of my pocket, right? In Ghana itself, there were restrictions in terms of when you went to certain places. So for example, I took my kids to the mall one day, and before you even get to the entrance of the mall, like the parking lot, you have people out there who are selling masks, because you can't enter unless you have a mask. So you need to have a mask. Before you enter the main entrance of the mall, there's temperature check and hand sanitizer, every single person. As you enter each store within the mall, temperature check and hand sanitizer. So if you go to 20 stores in the mall, you're getting temperature checked and hand sanitized 20 times. It was a very short trip to the mall for me that day, right? And masking. And so the reason I bring this up is that, when it comes to things like this, when it comes to health, whether it's modern, religious, or traditional, people are seen as authority figures. Nobody's gonna question it. I never saw anybody question, why do I have to wear a mask? Why do I have to, do the hands, nobody. Over here in the United States, a little bit different, right? There was a lot of, Why do I got to, I don't want to wear the mask and all of that. But over there, it was like everybody was doing it, right? And my kids used to like repeat the phrase, because they had this, like in all the places, it said, no mask, no entry, or no mask, no service. And this was something you saw everywhere. And so because of that role of folks being seen as authority figures, it's a little bit easier to kind of impose some of these things that over here would probably not have it be as easy to do. But that's one of the reasons too why COVID didn't run as rampant over there as well. A lot of our functions, like funerals and weddings, are religious based. And so unfortunately, my grandfather died right like in the middle of COVID. And at his funeral, my mom said, everybody has to wear a mask or you're not coming. Everybody wore a mask. The imam was there, he was like, listen, she said you gotta wear a mask, wear a mask. People wore their masks, nobody kind of, did that. And so having a, let's say, a unity kind of effort using all of these things together, I feel, is a way to kind of push us past some of these, because there really needs to be the understanding that not everybody has access to all of these things. You gotta work with people where they are, right? And so that's where some of our beliefs, shall I say, come from. But, like I said, I'm not an expert in this. This is just from my own kind of, my own observations, shall I say. Somebody else might have totally different observations as well. But I'll leave it there and open it up to any questions. Anybody has?
So I'll start it out then, if somebody's gonna.
All right.
What I was thinking when I was looking at the juxtaposition of 3 different healing, I was thinking about all the YouTube videos and stuff of the Ebola outbreak, like in Liberia and Ghana, I guess, as well.
Yeah, a little bit.
And they had, forcibly are dragging people into the ambulances to take them to the hospitals, because from what I heard from Liberians, it was seen as almost like, it's so antithetical to their way of healing, and people in wound suits are gonna put you in a place that you're not gonna come out of.
Yeah.
Right? But was that something, that's a clash of like cosmopolitan medicine and traditional healing practices, I guess. Like, did you see, is that in Ghana as well?
Or? Oh yeah, it's everywhere. And I think part of the problem is that so many people wait so long, like when they exhaust the traditional healing, when they exhaust the religious, that's when they then say, okay, let me put together some money to actually go to a hospital. And for a lot of people by that time, it's a little late. Like in Ghana, at least where I'm from, hospitals are known as places where people go to die. Like that's just it. I mean, we don't have any notion of like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go get a vaccine, or I'm gonna go get my teeth cleaned or something. Like, you don't go to a hospital unless you really, really have to. And so yeah, no, absolutely.
And actually, that's something I tell my students when we do like health and wellness. Like, there's like every culture has a hierarchy of like, this doesn't work, then what you do, and then you go to, and they're different. They're switched. But they are. We might go to a doctor as one after the chicken soup, but and then go and do some homeopathic thing if that didn't work. Paul Stoller, who the exhibition is on, and he was he's Jewish, but he's also a Songhai sorcerer as well. When he had cancer, he was doing chemos, he was praying, he was, doing, spirit possession stuff, and made the doctors do it too.
Oh, yeah.
Might as well do it all, right? Cover all your bases and
May
see
as
what
well.
you can do.
Yeah. You don't know what's gonna work.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that quote. I have to say I wrote it down because I thought it was a really good quote. The reason why these practices exist today is because they work. In some way they work, right? And so we don't know necessarily exactly why or how, but it's true. If it's been going on for 2,000 years, there's something going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. You mentioned that a lot of times, like there's only like one major hospital. How do the hospital, like, is it a problem where like the hospitals get too many people?
Absolutely. Yes, yes. So Corley Blue Hospital, which is the major hospital in Accra. So Ghana got national health insurance, it was like universal health insurance, I think in like 20 something. It's been around for a few years. And so theoretically, folks should be able to go to the hospital if they have this insurance, right? You know, just like you have insurance here, you go to the hospital. In this hospital specifically, they have a hierarchy. So if you're willing to pay out of pocket, they will bump you to the front of the line. My dad had colorectal cancer a couple of years ago. And so he went to this hospital and he was told that if he wanted to be, if he has health insurance. So they told him, if you're going to pay with the health insurance, and this was in May, then you won't be able to get in for surgery until December. Okay, so this is May. But they said, if you're willing to pay out of pocket, we can get you into surgery next month. So there is a demand. There's just not enough resources. And I think that's true kind of like across, most of the continent. Yeah. So there's a lot. There's wait lists for a lot. Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
So then, if somebody has a national insurance, they can't opt to pay out of pocket?
They can.
Oh, they can.
Yeah, they can, yes. And so you can imagine who the folks are who are gonna be able to pay out of pocket, right? So, you gotta have that means to be able to do it. So it's not everybody who's able to.
That's not West Africa. I mean, Italy is the same way,
Yeah.
right? And we had our first kid in Italy, and we still paid out of pocket to get, the ultrasounds more frequently and, regularly, and not stay in line and stuff like that. So.
For the people living in urban areas, would you say they turn to traditional and religious methods before the modern methods, or?
I would say people who live in urban areas, they have more access. So I wouldn't be surprised if they do like a multitude of things at the same time. I would say they're probably more prone to that. I will say that with more of the industrialization and stuff like that, people are more apt to go to the hospital, especially like the younger generation. Like they're like, I'm gonna go to the hospital, I'm not gonna like, kind of wait. You tend to see like the opposite sometimes as well. Like they go to the hospital and they don't feel like, they're getting what they need, and so they're like, let me try the traditional stuff as well. And one of the reasons is that again, speaking about northern Ghana, if you're taking medication and it doesn't burn, it doesn't sting, it's not bitter, then it ain't working. That is what we pick. And so when I was growing up, we used to take these anti-malaria pills, and they were coated, right, because they're really bitter. And so one year, I don't know why, but my dad gave my grandmother some, and she took them and she was looking at them, she's like, these things don't work. My dad's like, what you mean? She's like, they don't taste like anything. Like, how can you take something that doesn't taste like anything and think that it works, right? And so there still may be some of that, going on.
They'll still give you hallucinations.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's part of that as well. Like people want to feel like, I like to say that if it's not difficult, then people don't appreciate it. Right? And so there might be some of that as well. But yeah. There was another question. Yes.
This might be silly, but you said earlier that there's a lot of bartering for the traditional healing practices. Do you see that in the religious and the modern healing practices too? Is there still bartering there?
Religious, most definitely. Modern, no. You gotta pay cash. Cash money is what they want, or the health insurance. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks everyone for coming.